Hi. Today, or in this video, we are going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that is what economic consequences it has for a project to use a code generator or a RAT tool or a more traditional programming. And the reason this is one of my favorite topics is, of course, that this is also the very good argument for why code generators are actually pretty good when it comes to IT projects and well, basically initializing an IT project, you need a budget, and if you don't have the budget money, things will never get lifted up. The code generator makes it a little easier on the hours from the very start. So by using code generators, you can initiate more projects and hopefully also as a consultant make more money. I have created this graph that you will see now, and the lower line here, which is red now, and continues into a red line and into a blue line, is basically the budget choice. And that's the choice you take when you use systems like Microsoft Access, a file maker. In the old days, it would also be stuff like Power Builder. The x-axis here is the complexity of the program, and the y-axis here is how much coding time do you actually have to spend. And for obvious reasons, when you start up a project, if you're using these RAT tools like Access and FileMaker, well, you get a head start because it's really easy to set up a couple of screens, and you have a lot of things that are defined or predefined for you, and things are going well. Whereas if you use more traditional tools like C#, Java, Python as well, Python is actually a little better because you don't have to write nearly as much, but it's still in that category, and Go, well, then initially you will have to write and define a whole lot more than you'd need to in Access and FileMaker. What then happens is that as time goes by, and let's say for a second that your application is actually a success, well, you will see more users. Users tend to be creative, and you will be asked to do more different extensions to your program. And at some complexity level, you will actually see that the RAT tools suddenly demands more programming time than a traditional programming language does. And that's because, well, an Access or a FileMaker can only handle so and so much. If you do something which is outside the scope of what these RAT tools can do, well, then you have to kind of trick it or to go outside the actual scope, and then suddenly it's not a very smart idea with a RAT tool. This also brings a lot of projects into this weird dilemma where, well, you want, of course, the project to be a success, but if it's too successful and you and you have all these demands created, well, then suddenly, well, you'd have to say no, or you'd have to restructure the whole thing, and that could be awfully expensive, and that's also not good. So you have this kind of a regret point somewhere in the development, especially if your project is successful. Then at some point you'll say, "Oh, damn it! Why didn't I start with a traditional programming language? Now I have to redo the whole thing." But on the other hand, initially you don't know whether a program will get a success or not, and you don't know what kind of weird demands the users will have after running the program. So in a lot of cases, well, budget choices are of course chosen simply due to the fact that, well, we have limited amount of budgets in an organization. The great thing about code generators are that they act like a rat tool. You get these forms up, these screens up, and you start just, picking different definitions that you want to have. You make choices about login routines or choices about how records should be handled, etc., etc. That looks a lot like a traditional rapid application development tool. And then at some point, when you get this complexity inside your project, well, what you still have, because that's what the code generator does, you have traditional code. This is the point where you clip and you say, oh, now the things are very complex. My code generator cannot handle this anymore. I will just start doing some normal Python code, Django code. And you will still be on, well, the best possible line of coding time. And that's the whole idea with code generators. That is that you optimize your coding time, and at the same time you don't have the constraints that you will have in a normal rat tool. Another thing which is very important when you're talking code generators and rat tools is, and here I'm just looking at Django. Basically, if we chose a traditional Django development environment or we chose the code generator environment, what is the difference? Normally, what you have is in traditional development phases, you have an analysis phase, you have prototyping phase, programming phase, test, and production phase. And if you use traditional Django, for instance, and here you have to look at the green lines, very, very quickly, you need a programmer involved in the development, maybe even before you have a budget for this project, because the clients would like to see a prototype. Maybe you don't even get paid for the prototype. Maybe a prototype is something you have to make even to, well, have the client think about initiating this project and assigning a budget. Whereas if you look at the code generator in the same phases, the analyst will be in charge all the way to prototype. And then, yes, that's the dark blue line here. You will, of course, in the programming phase, have a programmer involved. But the analysts can still do a lot in this phase, where the in the traditional environment, well, at the prototyping level, analysts will not actually be involved very much during this phase. And in many cases, especially with smaller projects, well, the analyst is the same guy as the client. Or the analyst is somebody who would like to get this project started. And with this kind of timeline, instead of this kind of timeline measuring where you use the resources, it's a good idea that the person who wants this started, or the organization that wants a project started, that they don't have to go out and spend a lot of money on programmers from the very start, because a lot of projects simply get killed just by the fact that no budget is assigned before you have a prototype. And well, if you don't have a budget, well, not a whole lot can be done. So that's another reason for looking at code generators, that you can simply push the spending of outside resources, and by that spending money, much further down the line before you have to do that. The third argument I have is, well, code generation is a lot faster than traditional Django programming once you get the hang of it. So you will also be in a position where you can have a prototype in a day instead of a week. In this graph, I have not taken these things into consideration, but that's another factor. I think it's very important that you look at not just the technical issues when you choose a strategy for development. You also have to kind of look at what is the economy behind that. But because at the end of the day, it's the economy that decides whether a project gets started in the first place, and whether at least management will consider a project a success or a failure. I hope you find these aspects as interesting as I do. Please comment on them if you want. I'd really like to hear your opinion on this topic. It's one of my favorite topics. And well, see you next time in another video. Thanks.